of the Azure CAF or the Azure CAFe, whatever your language. So it's me and Michael again, but today we have the pleasure of having our colleague Dom Allen join us to talk about the importance of the Cloud Adoption Framework, otherwise known as the CAF. So Dom, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I'm Dom Allen. I work in our skilling organization, and I work on the product strategy for the Cloud Adoption Framework, the Azure Well Architected Framework, and the Azure Architecture Center.
Cool. So just a small job there then, Dom. You'll be on our speed dial anyway when it comes to all this kind of stuff. All right, cool. So I think we can just jump straight into it. What is the CAF, Dom? Tell us, please.
So Cloud Adoption Framework is the kind of the start to finish journey that we teach to customers about how to be successful in using or migrating to Azure. So it teaches all of the kind of key milestones, right from I've got an idea, I want to move into the cloud, through to I want to run my environment for years and years, and it needs to be, optimized for operations and secure and well governed, all those good things. So we teach it in these methodologies. So from start to finish, left to right, we have strategy, which is all about building your business case and kind of understanding the real motivations for moving to the cloud. Planning, which as the name suggests, is how we're going to approach this adoption journey and the program of work for adopting. Ready, which is about building your landing zone, for example, and getting those platform foundations in place. Adopt, which is all about the big motions of whether it's migrating or innovating in the cloud or modernizing your environments or your kind of portfolio workloads. And then into the operational phases, govern, manage, secure. And that's very much about the continuous running and the operational stage of once you've got your environment up and running and the organization's using it.
So there's a lot there then.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's intended really to be kind of a broad set of guidance that's applicable for the majority of customers. So it's based around the concepts of considerations and recommendations. So really, we're not looking to provide a specific answer for every situation. It's helping people learn what thinking they need to do in order to make decisions that are appropriate for their business.
Okay,
that's really interesting there, Dom. Especially when you, like you said, from left to right, and you started at strategy.
Yeah.
We find in the field that a lot of our customers start in the ready phase and they leave out the strategy and the governance phases.
Yeah.
What's your guidance on how to almost remedy that?
So that ready phase, building that Azure landing zone, is super important, right? We teach it as a kind of fundamental concept that you can't build a scaled out Azure environment unless you've got your fundamentals right. It's the same as building like a house or a stadium. You have to get your foundations right. So that landing zone is the first technical step, super important. However, the stages that come before it, whilst it may be kind of talking to a different audience inside the organization, the IT decision makers, the business decision makers, they're also really important for the long-term success of using something like a hyperscale cloud like Azure, because it's very easy to build a workload in Azure and have great success with it and kind of, see results from that specific workload. But if a business wants to go through genuine transformation and unlock all of the capabilities of being in something like Azure, you have to start with a strong business case. You have to get buy-in from top to bottom through your organization about why you're doing it, what the kind of business benefits are, what the financial benefits are. So starting with a strong strategy, a strong business case is super important. Now, that being said, obviously we make it really easy for people to start up Azure subscriptions and get kind of dip their toe in the water and start to build things. So just because you've started doesn't mean that you can't come back and double check your thinking and make sure that what you've learned already by building an Azure environment is going to stand up to a business case or the kind of financial considerations that a business wants to apply to a program like that. So I think wherever you are in your journey, even if it is just quick references back to those previous pieces of thinking or previous methodologies, it's really important to make sure that as you go forwards, you're building it from strong foundations.
Yeah. Because I often heard people referring it to as an iterative process. And I'm like, okay, I guess I can understand that from a, if you're building something and you're getting feedback and, we've got to change X, Y, Z, especially because Michael and I always get called in at the landing zone point, the landing zone's not here. So are you kind of suggesting therefore the whole thing is a iterative process?
Yeah, because I think, as Michael was saying, the piece that I called out there was left to right, start to finish. It is a journey in one direction. However, everything should be seen as checking our thinking, checking our assumptions along the way. So as you build out your landing zone or as you build your workloads, you should be checking that is this aligning to the assumptions we made in our business case? Is this aligning to the projections we made in our cost forecasting for how we're going to use that environment? So it is just making sure as you go along that what you thought to be true previously is still true as you progress.
Okay, so so we take a large enterprise. So I can envision that working if there's just three of us, and Matt can be the one that can you check this process, that type of thing. Where would you start though in a large enterprise? What would be the first thing to do?
So one of the really important things we teach in the cloud adoption framework, and I think it's a fairly common concept across the industry now, is a cloud center of excellence. And having that cloud center of excellence that is formed of different stakeholders from different parts of the business that are used to govern and set the direction for the use of that cloud environment. So we talk about that in a number of places across the journey, but that's really important for organizations to make sure that they're talking to all of the relevant stakeholders as that Azure environment gets built out.
So would you say then I often heard you mentioned a cloud, so a COE, a cloud, or CCoE, a cloud center of excellence. So it almost feels like they're one of the key things to have in place. If you're looking for, I hate the phrase just lift and shift, for example. But if you're looking for true transformation of your business, then it almost sounds like, great, but you do need a COE, cloud center of excellence in place before you start. But having said that, go on. Sorry, Dom.
Even in just a lift and shift, there will be things that are new when it comes to the cloud. There'll be different ways of working. There'll be different kind of controls that you can apply compared to a kind of traditional on-premises. So there will be some thinking that needs to go into it. But ideally, what you want to be doing, and you're making that investment, making it time and cost into moving into a cloud environment, you want to be taking advantage of the benefits of it. There are things that you can do that you simply can't do on premises. So having something like a cloud center of excellence is really important to making sure that everyone's signed up to that vision.
Okay. All right. Okay. So cloud center of excellence, strong business case. We've touched on also the landing zone. Just conscious that a few listeners, viewers of this may not know what a landing zone is. Do you mind just covering that in a bit more detail?
Yeah, sure. So I think that, like I said before, the kind of analogy of building a stadium, an apartment block, whatever, is the best analogy here, where as you start to grow it up, it's entirely dependent on how good the foundations are.
Yeah.
So an Azure landing zone sets those foundations of your Azure environment through kind of giving governance and giving good structure to enable it to safely scale quickly, whilst not introducing any technical debt or any kind of security or governance risks, because you're putting logical structure in place, you're putting Azure policies in place, all of the things that you need to take advantage of cloud, but in a safe and scalable way.
Yeah. Okay. Getting those building blocks in place.
Yeah.
Because we come across a lot of customers who I guess we could say have attempted that previously, grown, got to a point of we're not quite right. We've got to change this. But at the same time, I always say to the customers, nothing's set in stone. You can always undo what this stuff, to the point. And it's interesting what you were saying as well, going back to the business case, reminding people, why did we do this in the first place?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we're a little bit fearful, especially us, those who are in the customers are even asking that question, because you don't really want to say, you sure you want to be doing this? But that's kind of the question you're thinking you should be asking throughout the whole process.
Exactly. And it's really about everything we do in cloud adoption framework and well architected and Azure Architecture Center it's balancing speed and control.
Yeah.
It's getting people to do things that are aligned to best practices that will ultimately make things easier because they're following best practices, but it's making sure you're taking the time to learn those best practices and do things in a sustainable way, so that you don't get to that point, that cliff edge 6 months, 12 months down the road, we go, we've got to retrofit some things here. It's all about sustainable growth.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, sorry, Matt. Yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
really,
go for it.
really interesting when you say about speed and control, balancing speed and control. Because what we find, true no fault of there's some customers who have evolved from like build a landing zone and we need to run some workloads in Azure, is they get the initial speed without so much control. And then
Yeah.
they some Azure limits later on and they hit some constraints later on. And as Matt was saying, there's the mindset that we built it and we just run with it. But in the cloud, it's a different operating model. You can build again.
Yeah.
And it's moving that mindset. I think that's really.
Yeah, totally, mate. Absolutely, totally. Yes, I do see it a lot, I must admit, where you built this thing and it goes dead fast, but it doesn't have any brakes. You don't have any indicators or anything like that. And it's like, it's only when you need the indicator do you realize you need the indicator or brake pedal or different, that type of thing. So I do see that. Look, I've also got when you were talking just there, Dom, you mentioned something else, WAF, well, architecture framework, which myself and Michael know about. It's a phrase that I do sometimes. I've just noticed a little bit of confusion about. Do you mind just giving 5 minutes on that as well?
Yeah, sure. So if we think of cloud adoption framework as being the kind of spine of the journey, from business case to building your landing zone to big migrations to operating, the thing that kind of targets is business decision makers, IT decision makers, platform owners, migration teams, operations teams, those kind of the teams that look after the things that are one to many. So portfolios, processes, platforms, those kind of things. But what's also really important is as a workload or an application team build their thing, their workload, we need to give them guidance on how to get the best out of Azure for that one thing at a time. And that's where the well-architected framework comes in. So well-architected is very much focused on one workload. How do we make this workload excellent? So the difference is kind of scale and focus. So CAF is that broad journey, whereas well-architected is really targeted at architects and implementers who are building the thing and want to know how to get security into a workload, but balance it against cost, performance, operations, and reliability. So they really are a better together story, depending on what your job is and what phase you are in your kind of adoption and implementation journey.
Oh, that's cool. That's the first time I've heard it referred to as a, you know what I'm going to say, as a workload focus, because that's quite interesting. Because it's sometimes I think of it as to be brutally honest, I've not, personally, I haven't thought of the WAF as it's almost in conjunction with the CAF. We love to throw our acronyms around. CAF, WAF.
So and I mean, well architected, and we can do a whole conversation on well architected.
Oh yeah, we do another call on that, Dom.
It's aimed at architecting workloads and optimizing workloads, but at the focus of that team that's focusing on the workload, whereas cloud adoption framework is looking at the platform, governing the platform, monitoring the platform.
I think that's a key point, right? So you take one thing away from this call, is like that, right? CAF focused on the platform, WAF focused on the workload. Yeah. Okay, I've learned something today. Thanks, Dom.
And we've told a lot of customers about the differences between the CAF and the WAF, but it's the simplicity of the explanation that makes sense here.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And the reality is, depending on the size of the organization, you'll have one process that's kind of focusing on great operations, great governance of your entire Azure environment through the CAF methodologies. But you could have hundreds of different workload teams applying the guidance of well-architected just to their workload. So you quite often see in the large organizations that they're running side by side, and it just depends on who the audience is, who the responsible individual is, whether they look at the cloud adoption framework guidance or the well-architected guidance.
Yeah, cool. Well, it's just sparked a thought, right? So old school system admins will remember when we build a platform, we then do a QA of that platform before it goes into production. It sounds like we should almost be running a well-architected framework assessment before go live of
Mm.
any solution that we're deploying to Azure almost.
Yeah.
Yep. And there is, so we have an assessment on our assessments platform for Go Live that's under the well-architected brand. And then a lot of obviously the guidance that we create as part of well-architected for workloads is very orientated on, there are checklists for things to consider. And then the Azure Advisor platform, once you've deployed your resources, the recommendations that surface in Azure Advisor are actually based on the well-architected, the 5 pillars of well-architected. So there's a connection in there. But also with the govern, manage, and secure methodologies of the cloud adoption framework, there's a lot of considerations in there about, as we move workloads into an operational state, they're going to get hooked up to the management tools that the Azure Landing Zone deploys, the governance controls, the security systems. So it really is kind of the connection between the two about how things get handed off from a workload team into operations, or just generally connected into the platform.
Brilliant. So I said we were going to try and keep this to under 30 minutes. We're at 32 minutes already. We can talk for hours, Dom, about this. There was just one more question I wanted to know. We were talking about this obviously beforehand. I don't think any of these calls we're going to do is where we're not going to talk about, AI and it's just just astonishing velocity at the moment of new technology that's coming out. It's amazing.
Mm.
How does a CAF cope with all this that's coming out? We talk about platform, we're talking about a framework. How does the CAF cope with technology in theory is not even yet being, released?
So there's a couple of parts to that. Firstly, the core methodologies of the cloud adoption framework, so that strategy, plan, ready, etc. We aspire for that to be relevant for the kind of 80 side of the 80-20 rule. So they are considerations that are broad platform and portfolio and process considerations that should apply to nearly everything. So statements like, you should use Azure policy to control things, not specific to a technology or a workload, but it's recommending that you use those big tools to control things across your platform. So that's the kind of the spine of it. So they're relatively unaffected by the technology that they're being applied to, provided that that technology supports the tools that we prescribe, which things like Azure Policy, Azure Monitor, pretty big hero products, right? So I think we're okay in that space.
Yeah.
But alongside those core methodologies, we have what are called Cloud Adoption Framework scenarios. And that's a specific set of guidance that speaks to an individual technology or an individual customer type. So today we have a scenario for retail, a scenario for defense in the US, and then we have some technology specific ones. So Azure Virtual Desktop got created, obviously because of the pandemic, SAP, high performance computing. And what those do is really tailor the guidance of each of the methodologies specific to the technology that's being talked about, if it warrants being talked about. So high performance computing, for example, is a topic that's big enough that we can teach specific guidance in each of the methodologies.
Okay. So, but in that instance, when you talk about HPC, high performance compute, and in the context of the CAF, you mentioned that it's a platform. So in essence, you say you're treating HPC as a platform, and we got our guidance and our best practices are all associated with the HPC platform as opposed to the workload. Is that right?
Yeah, or just it's more focused on, there will be a customer type that their entire cloud adoption journey is just to deliver a high performance computing environment for their users.
That one workload, right?
That one workload, that one technology.
Yeah.
So how do they approach the strategy, the business case development, preparing their environment end to end to deliver the outcome of, I want to use HPC in my business. So those scenarios get created kind of as we see trends and demand building. So we're constantly evaluating and planning to build those scenarios for those really big technology topics.
Yeah.
But also we want to make sure that that connection into the well-architected framework is there as well. So for technologies like SAP, which we know is a popular topic, there's a scenario in CAF about how to plan the end-to-end journey to adopt SAP. But there's also great workload guidance in the well-architected framework about how to configure SAP specifically, and then reference architectures in Architecture Center for those people actually doing the implementation.
Oh, right. And that would, so for those doing the implementation, that's probably where the accelerators come into it.
Yes.
So and your deployment is linked to the CAF recommended landing zone.
Yeah.
I've learned something else.
So really the intention with everything we do is that it's all grounded in the same customer journey, the same start to finish journey for them from building a business case to running it for years.
Yeah.
Everything should be supporting that forward motion of helping customers be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent.
Perfect.
And I think that's a great way to finish, to be honest, Dom. There to make customers, successful with their cloud adoption. Can't beat that. Can't beat that little tagline at the end.
We've been looking
marketing.
for a tagline for Azure CAFe.
So there is a lot of information online.
Yeah.
Our posts, when I post the video, I'll post the links and stuff. Is there a single place to go? Is it just like learnmicrosoft.com, that type of thing? Would you suggest that for people to have a good look at it, or is there anywhere else?
So we've got a short link, so aka.ms/CAF, CAF, and that will take you to the front page, and you can see the entire framework and get started from there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, there you have it.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Dom.
Thank you for having me.
It's really good to see you, my friend.
Yeah.
Good stuff. All right. Good.
Brilliant.
See you soon for the WAF session.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Cheers.